So today what we're going to show is how to do fake piped binding, basically. So what this is a two-toned binding. And I don't brag on a lot of stuff, but I am good at binding. And when I teach my binding classes, they fill up really quick. And binding's one of those things that if you do a bunch of tiny little things, it adds up to something really great. I make my binding 2 1/4 inches. If you make your binding 2 1/2 inches, the math is slightly different. So if you like 2 1/4 inch binding, you need to cut this piece, the main piece, 1 1/4, and the accent piece 1 1/2. If you like a 2 1/2 inch binding, then the cut is a little bit more difficult because you need to add 1/8 of an inch to either side. This needs to be 1 3/8, and this needs to be 1 5/8. But either way, you're going to sew this strip together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. The 1/4 inch matters, so make sure you're getting a good scant 1/4 inch. I highly recommend a 1/4 inch piecing foot for this. Another little tip I'm going to give you is if you so this is only one width of fabric, it's not that big. If you've got to do a whole quilt, you're going to have to join seams. I do not recommend sewing your strips together and then joining them because you need to do the 45-degree angle. So take your skinny strips and sew them to each other so that you have 2 long strips, and then sew them, together. Another tip is where you have your seams, make sure that you don't match up. So see, here's my seam here, and here's my seam on the other color. Offset it just a little bit. So what I'll do is on one end or the other, I'll cut like a 2-inch piece off so that my seams are not stacked on top of each other. Otherwise, you're going to have a big lump, and nobody wants a lumpy binding. You're going to sew binding to your backing, and you're going to take the piece that you're going to see the most of and put it face down. And we're going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Here is one of the biggest tips to doing binding well. Pull on the binding just a little bit. Don't yank on it, but just put a little bit of pressure on it so that it stretches ever so slightly. Okay? And we're going to stitch until we get to almost to the end. I'm going to stop. This is my favorite ruler for this. I'm going to take and mark a 1/4 inch from the end of where my quilt stops, which is right here. And I do this on every corner. I know it's a pain in the butt, but I promise you it's worth it. Then I'm going to stitch right up to that line. And I want my needle to land almost right on that line. I back up about 2 stitches. You're going to fold it 90 degrees up and then back down again. Everything in the corner needs to be a perfect square. I take a pencil and I mark in the crack of where that fold is. Drop your foot and position this so that your needle is going to come down right on that line. Okay, this is where the pivot feature of this machine is really handy because you can adjust it and get it straight and lined up. I'm going to take about 3 stitches and I'm going to back stitch 2 because that lets you kind of fuss with that corner and not worry about your stitches coming out. Pull this back, and just the quilt part, not the binding. Cut about a 1/4 inch of that corner off. I'll take this over to my iron and I will press this out. Look at how nicely you get this mitered point over here. It just sort of lays there. This Stitch Perfection tape is one of my favorite tools for a number of reasons. One, it's water soluble, so when you're done with this quilt and you throw it in the washing machine, it's not stiff anymore. 2, you don't have to iron it. You just stick it on there. For this, we're going to use the 1/4 inch. You pull this tape off, and I will put this, and it doesn't have to be up in the corner. Don't worry about that. I will put it right on the edge of this binding. And I'll go most of the way to the end and then just tear it off. It's not super sticky because it's not supposed to hold it forever. It's just supposed to hold it long enough that you can stitch it. So we're just going to pull the paper off. It's double stick tape. We're going to roll this over the edge. Don't tug it. Don't try to like fold a gift here. You want to roll it over the edge, but you want your quilt to come right to the edge of your fold. So if you did all your cutting right and you did your 1/4 inch seam allowance, this part should be a piece of cake. So to get that corner where you want, this is another hospital corner thing, right? You want this, you want to press this all the way out to the end, then roll your other side over. See how that lines up real nice? Put on a stitch in the ditch foot, which is this. It's got this little groove in it, or what would you call that? Like a training wheel. I put my machine in my needle in the center position, and you line that training wheel right up there next to where your seam is. Your needle is going to come down right next to where your guide is. So we're just going to run this along. And I fold it back over on itself, that's all going to line up. I've got a white thread on the back and it just blends in. It doesn't go right in that crack, but I don't really care because I'd rather that this side looks cool and have this just match the backing. So I did a white thread on the back and I did a teal thread on the top because it either blends in or it accents it really nicely. And see how it just sort of rides that edge? We will see you all on Wednesday. Bye.